Hi everyone, this is Jamie with Babytunes, here to give you guys our second podcast. Unfortunately, Marcos is not going to be here since he started a new job and we're having trouble kind of scheduling where we're going to chat, but hopefully he and possibly also our friend Eric is going to pop in on the third podcast. So today what I'm going to do is just chat with you guys a little bit about different things, play some tunes. Very first thing I wanted to chat about though was the World Cup, since yesterday was the Brazil-Germany game where Brazil got absolutely destroyed by Germany. And today it's about an hour until Netherlands plays Argentina, which I'm so pumped for. And what I really noticed in the last game, Brazil versus Germany, was kind of the difference in the cultures. And I'm not talking so much about Brazil and Germany, I'm just talking about kind of US versus the rest of the world. I grew up in Washington, D.C., as I believe I mentioned in the last podcast, which has a pretty good soccer or football culture, just because there's a lot of people coming in from all over the world, a lot of people from Central America, South America, Africa, and Europe, and also the city's just a bit more international because it's the government. So I thought that was kind of like a little hotbed for soccer. But I mean, still, it doesn't get as crazy as it was in Brazil. Like they were filming the fans, and like you saw that little kid just sobbing uncontrollably into a Coke cup, a bunch of women crying, screaming, and then afterwards, people were leaving in the middle of the game, were burning the Brazilian flag, and then at the very very tail end of the game, if you guys were listening to the English announcers, what they were saying is there was an announcement that went around the stadium telling all the German fans to remain in their seats because they need to be escorted from the building, from the stadium, which I thought kind of crazy, just because that sort of thing never ever happens in America. Because in America, the soccer fans I found have been pretty nice. Everyone just wants to hang out, have a good time, and play a little bit of soccer. So I really wish I had the chance to go to Brazil and kind of see that like fanaticism where it becomes more of a religion instead of a sport. Well, the first tune I've got for you guys here is by Circle Research, which is two guys. Their names, at least on their SoundCloud, are Nick T and Astro, and they're a production duo from Toronto. And this song is called Remember the Time. It's one of my favorite songs that we've uploaded to the Babytunes channel. So just take a quick listen. Let me know what you guys think.
Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time? Do you remember when we fell in love? We were young and innocent then. Do you remember how it all began? It seemed like heaven, so why did it end? Do you remember back in the fall we got together all day long? Do you remember us holding hands in each other's eyes? We were there. Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time? Do you remember how we used to talk? We stay on the phone all night until dawn. Do you remember all the things we say? Like I love you so I'll never let go. Do you remember back in the spring, every morning the birds would sing? Do you remember those special times. They'll go on and back of my mind. Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time?
So once again, that was Remember the Time by Circle Research. Definitely follow them on SoundCloud if you want. Like a couple of their songs. They're really nice guys. I've been chatting with them recently on SoundCloud. Really like them. So the next song I'm going to be going into is Hazy Moon by AN.Zaa. I'm not really quite sure how he pronounces that. It's AN.Zaa. This dude's from Tokyo. Again, I've chatted with him. Really friendly. But before we hop into that, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about science. I found this really cool article about the Earth that has really kind of shaped our perspective of how the Earth is formed. So what we think right now, or at least what I was taught in school, is that there's the crust of the Earth, which is basically what we live on. Very, very small. Maybe I think 80 miles deep. Actually, I'm not gonna give any numbers because it's totally wrong. I can never remember any numbers. But very, very thin. We live on top of that. The ocean basically is part of it. Like even the deepest part of the ocean is still part of the crust. Below the crust, there's a very, very large part that's called the upper mantle, which scientists said is just kind of plasma moving around. We have the lower mantle, which is very hot. And we're talking, when I say like deep, we're talking hundreds of miles deep. Below the lower mantle is the core. And again, no one quite knows what's down there. They have theories, but everyone's still trying to figure it out. But something new that came up is they've found, or at least are pretty sure, that between the upper mantle and the lower mantle is a ring of minerals, many of which contain water. And it's basically oceans worth of water. A lot of it fresh water too. And these minerals kind of look like diamonds. They call it ringwoodite. And it just imagine looking at like a diamond or kind of a crystal, but a good portion of it on the inside is filled with water. And imagine like all of the water on Earth right now, including the oceans, which we can't drink. That's a shit ton of water. That's so much water all over the place. But imagine 4 or 5 times that of just fresh water under there. And this always kind of gets me excited and gets me thinking about the future, since I know a big problem throughout a huge part of the world is water and being able to get good water and maintain good water. We're losing it all the time. It goes into the oceans or it becomes unusable through pollution. So I just like started thinking about it, like what in the future could be an industry based around that. And I just thought it'd be so cool as if we could eventually start mining deep within the mantle for water. That would just be a really interesting industry that pops up. And I always get thinking about these things just because I'm kind of a fan of sci-fi. I'm a really big fan of Firefly and just the concept of us expanding beyond the world and then becoming smugglers or becoming asteroid miners or miners on different planets. Just I think is really exciting and really cool. But anyways, we're going to move on again to AN.Zaa and Hazy Moon. Let us know what you guys think.
And I would like to play a little tune I just composed not so long ago.
It's Billie Holiday.
Bird. And at this time, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who come
So that was Hazy Moon by AN.Zaa, a nice little jazzy tune. I heard jazz is actually pretty big in Japan since after World War II, when America occupied them for so long. There was just a lot of mixing between the cultures. And the Japanese really picked up jazz since that was a really big thing, but I guess kind of jazz spread all over the world. The other thing that the Japanese really liked, and I'm pretty sure it was introduced by the Americans, was whiskey. And I just thought that kind of funny. So I was talking before this song about kind of space and space travel, and the other really exciting thing that's happening in our time is Elon Musk with SpaceX. And for those of you that don't know, Elon Musk he's technically South African, but he came to America a really long time ago, and I'm pretty sure he's an American citizen now. He's a super genius. He's a programmer. He's an engineer. When he was, I think, about 23 or 24, designed PayPal and sold it for several $100 million with his brother. And then he went on to form SpaceX, which is a company that's basically literally rocking it in kind of rocketry and space travel. They have a bunch of NASA contracts for taking supplies up to the International Space Station. And he's one of the only private companies that has been able to form a rocket that can break the atmosphere and do it very, very efficiently. And what he said in a lot of different interviews, if you look them up on YouTube, and if you guys want to know his name, how it's spelled, it's Elon space Musk. So he found that with rockets, it costs an enormous amount of money to build a rocket, but then the fuel is very, very low. And the way that people have conventionally been building rockets, both Americans and Russians, mainly kind of during the space race back in the 60s, 70s, they would build a rocket that could take off into space. It would shed a lot of its fuel tanks in the atmosphere, or once it just broke atmo, and then kind of fly around, do whatever, and then it would eject kind of an escape pod, if you think about like Star Wars or Star Trek, that would come back down to Earth, have parachutes, and would land in the water. That's really inefficient if you think about it. If you think about throwing like several $100 million, euros, rubles, whatever, into building a rocket, you're basically throwing it away. It would be the same thing as every single time that we flew like a Boeing 747 from Moscow to London, if all of a sudden you just burned it. You just burned the plane afterwards. That's ridiculous. So what he found is he's trying to design rockets. I think it's called the Dragon series of rockets. And these rockets can have a vertical takeoff, like most kind of spaceships you see your rocket launches, but then it can also lower itself back down. And if you go to their YouTube channel, you can find a lot of videos of that, of it actually launching, getting pretty high in the atmosphere, and then coming back down, which is amazing. What that means is that you can build a rocket, and then you only have to spend a couple $100,000 or euros to replenish the fuel. That's one thing he's doing. I think that's super cool. Tesla, the electric car, is the other thing. Tesla, I think, is really good for the planet, just kind of taking away fossil fuels, which can be then used to launch rockets. But what Elon Musk is saying is he's very, very confident that within 15 to 20 years, we'll have colonies on Mars, which is another fascinating idea, that within most of our lifetimes we'll be able to see that, and that there probably will be the first Martian born on Mars. Then there's a bunch of questions like, does he have a Martian passport, or is he technically from the country that his parents came from? Who knows? It's going to be crazy. The other big thing in the kind of Mars space race is Mars One, which, if you Google Mars One, it's a plan to start a colony on Mars. And the way that they're funding it is, it's going to be 24-hour kind of Big Brother reality show, and like straight up a real reality show. They're not fucking around here. They're going to pick, I believe it's 4 astronauts, and in 2020, I believe, or 2022, they're going to be launching this up. It's a one-way journey. They're not going to be able to come back. So they're going to fly, land on Mars, set up a colony. They're going to be living in these little, basically, bubbles. Like imagine a tent. That's what they're going to be living in, connected to another tent, which is connected to a greenhouse. And they're going to be living there for a couple of years until more supplies can be dropped off and more people come. And they've had an application process. I believe The application process is shut, and they're just interviewing people and deciding who they want to send up first. I thought about that for a second. I was like thinking, like, well, that would be kind of cool if you applied and got accepted and went to Mars. But then I also thought, I make a lot of rash decisions, and if I got to Mars and went, man, this fucking sucks, I'm not cool with this. I want to go back to Earth. Can't really do that, and then I would probably go crazy. And that's what they're, I'm sure, most concerned about. One person just losing their shit and just killing everybody else. So, on that positive note, we're going to switch over to our third song. This is called Wonderbreat, Breat, by Elaflume. And Elaflume is from Ufa, Russia, UFA. I've been working with a couple of Russian people pretty recently. Really cool, interesting style of music. So, guys, just listen up, let us know what you think. Feel free to comment on YouTube. I'll give you the links in the description of this podcast. But also, please follow the artist, give them some support, comment on any of their songs, like them, everything you can do on SoundCloud. Love that song. Another one of my favorites on the Babytunes channel. Next up, I'm going to be playing a song by these two guys. They have a band called Fingerprints Yeah. The song is called Mao, M-A-O. I'm not quite sure where these guys are. Their SoundCloud says they're in deep Melbourne, Botswana. Botswana's in Africa, and Melbourne is a city in Australia. And then when you click on their Twitter, it takes you kind of some like sex porn Twitter, and when you click on a link to their website, it takes it to a different band. So I have no idea where these guys are from. I think Australia. Just a couple things I've seen, I would hazard a guess that they're from Australia. Also, these guys, the picture is of them on their SoundCloud. They look kind of Maori, so that would explain kind of New Zealand, Australia. But speaking of Australia, there's a lot of great sounds going out there. I know Majestic has a whole playlist called Australia. Or is it Sound of Style? Can't quite remember, but check out one of them. Both of them have a lot of Australian songs. A lot of the good beat makers I've found are coming out of there. And I've never visited Australia, but I've always wanted to because it seems like such an interesting place. And the geography interests me the most because it's a huge country, really big, but only a tiny portion is inhabited by humans. And basically it's just around the coast, and more so the eastern and southern coasts, a little bit on the northern coast. But it's just because they have the outback, like the middle of that country is just all desert, and no one lives there. There's a couple of stations out there, and they have long roads cutting across the country. but no one really drives them from what I've heard. They don't even have trains really going out there. Instead, they have these really, really cool things called road trains. Definitely Google it, check it out. Basically, imagine like a semi, like a really, really big truck. But now imagine 3 or 4 of them attached together, and the truck literally driving them is almost the size of a house. It's huge. It's basically like a miniature train on wheels. And they just drive this all the way across the country. And they're going through the outback. If they break down, they have to be able to fix their truck. If there's a river, they have to be able to ford it. It's really cool. I think it's a kind of like a geek following in Australia about that. There's a huge amount of pictures and videos on YouTube of these guys driving around. But I just thought that's cool. I've always wanted to go to Australia and see what it's like, since it kind of, in a way, it's America and Australia, I think, might be kind of similar in the sense that it was British colonies that sent there that eventually became independent. But I would really just like to see what that culture is like. I've chatted with a couple of photographers that we've used on Babytunes and a couple of other people working who are like beat makers, musicians here. All really, really nice people. So, without further ado, let's play Fingerprints Yeah, Mao. Most likely they're from Australia, if not Botswana, but we'll just see. That was Mao by Fingerprints Yeah. Really love that song. Kind of be like an awesome one to just kind of like bang through in a club and go crazy. And if you guys checked out the song on our YouTube channel, it's a picture of Beta Club here in Denver, which was a really, really fun time. They're really nice, allowed us to take pictures of everybody and take pictures of the show and just kind of really enjoy it. So I thought that was fun. And I also forgot one other story to tell you guys about Australia. So my friend Mike is half Australian. He's from DC as well, which is where his mom was born. And he didn't really interact too much with his Australian family, but the stories he told me of them were really crazy. And he said his uncle, who still lived in Australia, who actually lived in the outback, recently died and left him like 100 acres of land or something. And apparently this guy, his uncle, lived in a shack in Australia, in the outback, totally alone, just with a bunch of guns. because what he was doing was he was convinced that both the stories of the Yeti, which is traditionally the abominable snowman, but is just kind of like a huge ape humanoid that wanders around. He said he was hunting them in the outback, and also he was hunting 50-foot lizards that walked around. And he lived there for 20 years, claimed he saw them, but was never able to kill any of them to have the body. I wanted to go to see this shack, to see where this kind of crazy guy lived for a really, really long time, but I wonder if that's ever going to happen. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. I want to say tune in next week, but I said that the first time, and then it was like a month later that we came out with the second podcast. I'm going to try to get on Marcos to schedule a third one. Hopefully we'll be able to get Eric in, who's really cool, also really big into the music scene here in Denver. But until then, please subscribe, follow us on Twitter, send any comments to us if you're a photographer or visual artist or a musician and would like us to feature you. Please, SoundCloud works, YouTube works, our Twitter works. You can also email us at babytunesmusic@gmail.com. Thanks so much, you guys. See you later.